Hey, Allison, I'm sorry, I just missed that. What were you,
The bridge is unmuted and I am just waiting for, we are now live, so you can go ahead and begin.
okay, we're not gonna, Deborah's gonna continue to try to log on. All right. All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Esther Manheimer and I'm the mayor of the city of Asheville, and I'm also the chair of the council subcommittee called Policy, Finance, and HR Committee. I'd like to welcome you to our November 14th, 2023 remote meeting. This is also a unique meeting in that it is a joint meeting with the city's audit committee. And we've got the members of the audit committee here today, and I'm going to introduce them in just a moment, as well as the council designee for the audit committee, Sage Turner. So they're all here. So let me just run through a few preliminaries here. Everyone's obviously participating virtually. To help our audience follow along, I'll state each section of the agenda aloud. We're streaming live on our virtual engagement hub, which is accessible through the virtual engagement hub link on the front page of the city's website. We also have an option for the public to listen live by phone. So for those of you out there with us today, welcome. For today's meeting, we have an option for you to, as I mentioned, for you to call in and listen live. And you can do that by dialing 855-925-2801, meeting code 5257. So I just use a very old school reference by dialing. You can just touch your phone, 855-925-2801, meeting code 5257. Your phone will be muted and you'll be able to hear the meeting live. And this has instructions about folks who are in the speaker queue. If you'd like to queue up in the speaker queue, you need to press *3 to do so. I'll now go through and introduce all committee members and staff who are participating virtually. And when I call your name, please say a quick hello. Councilwoman Maggie Ullman.
Hello, everybody.
Councilwoman Kim Roney.
Good morning.
And then I have on here Deborah Campbell. Anyone know if she's had any success getting on? So
Deborah said she is still having trouble and for us to go ahead without her.
okay, that's what we're doing. All right, our city manager may get on when her technology situation is resolved. We have our city attorney, Brad Branham.
Good morning.
Our finance director, Tony McDowell.
Good morning, everyone.
Our assistant finance director, Becky Ogles.
Good morning.
And as I mentioned, this is a joint meeting with the audit committee. We have the chair of the audit committee, Nate Hathaway.
Good morning.
And the secretary of the audit committee, Andrew Emery.
Good morning.
And Debbie Evanchik.
Good morning.
Sandra Frempong.
Hello, everyone.
And Councilwoman Sage Turner as the council designee.
Good morning. And I see Deborah was able to join.
And yep, our city manager made it on. Hello, welcome. Good morning, Deborah Campbell.
Good morning. Thank you all, and I apologize again.
No problem. We're just doing our introductions. Okay, so I'm going to now turn to the agenda, and I don't have on here as the first item on our agenda to approve minutes. So I guess we're not approving minutes. We'll come. Yep.
I'll say this is Kim. I can move to approve if we're prepared to do so.
Since this was a joint meeting, we typically don't ask you all to approve minutes. We'll come back and approve the meeting minutes from the last meeting at your next meeting.
Motion withdrawn.
Okay. All right. All right. So the first item on our agenda is the fiscal 2023 audit presentation. And Tony, I'm assuming I turn it over to Deborah, who's going to turn it over to you, who's going to turn it over to somebody. So I will start that process. Deborah?
All righty. So thank you. And again, good morning, everyone. This is a really important time for the organization, for the community, and especially for finance, who finally have crossed a huge hurdle for the organization in terms of the audit. We have consultants our specialists who are here that will provide us with some findings, the results of the audit. And Tony, I will turn it over to you to make the introductions, and I believe that you're going to start with the presentation. And I also want to thank the audit committee for being here as well. Tony.
Thank you, Deborah. And I'm bringing up my screen here. And good morning again, everyone. I'm going to kick things off this morning with just a short introduction, and then I'm going to turn it over to Dan Garrity and Richard Hart from the audit firm of Cherry Beckert. And the bulk of the time this morning, you all are going to be hearing from them. But I am going to do a few slides here to start things off, and I think I have those brought up. So I want to start with just some key takeaways, as we often do with our presentations to these committees. And we have 4 of them this morning. The first is obviously the audit was completed. It was completed near the end of October, 1st of November. We actually, the team at Cherry Beckert pushed the button and submitted it to the Local Government Commission on the morning of November 6th. So it is complete and submitted. And once again, this year, we're happy to report that we received what's called an unmodified or clean audit, and that is the highest level of assurance that our external auditors can provide. And Dan will likely talk during his presentation a little more about what that means. We did this year, with this first year, we've had Cherry Beckert as our external audit firm, and it's been very helpful having a new set of auditors looking at our books this year. And I would say as a result of that, they identified 2 accounting errors this year that they're going to report to you all, that they're required to report to you all as findings. And again, Dan's going to cover those in depth with you all. And these were errors on accounting errors, like I said, in materials that we submitted to Cherry Beckert. They've been corrected since then, but again, because they were errors in the initial work that we submitted to them, they're required to report those to management and to the board as well. And then finally, and I'll talk a little bit more about this a few slides in, but one of the key financial figures that we share with council at the end of this process is our unassigned fund balance in the general fund. And this year we ended fiscal year 2023 with an unassigned fund balance of just under 19%, which is in line with our results from prior years. And I'll show you all a graph on that in a few moments, and slightly above our city policy threshold of 15%. So just quickly, so why have an external audit? Why are we here this morning talking about this work that has in many ways consumed a large portion of the finance department for the last 4 months or so? And I guess right off the bat, I would say, well, it's required by state statute. General Statute 159-34 requires that all local governments in North Carolina have its accounts audited at the end of each fiscal year by a outside firm, a certified public accountant, or an accountant certified by the local government commission that's qualified to audit local government accounts. And that auditor is independent. They are selected by the board, and they report directly to the governing board. You all selected Cherry Beckert earlier this year. I think it was either March or April that we brought you all, brought City Council the contract with Cherry Beckert, which was approved. And then Cherry Beckert will be back to report directly to City Council at your December meeting, the results of the audit that they're going to share with you all today. So that's one reason you should have an external audit. Another one is it's also a requirement of the federal government. If you receive any grant money that exceeds, or if you spend more than $750,000 in federal grant money in any fiscal year, the federal government requires what's called a single audit. And that audit looks at both your financial statements and your programmatic compliance. And so that means how well did you comply with, or did you comply with the stipulations of the grants that you may have received? And this year, for example, one of the main things that our auditors looked at from that perspective was our American Rescue Plan funding. It was one of our largest grant expenses from last year, and they may talk a little bit more about that as they go through their presentation. And then just a few other reasons why it's important to have an external audit. It's obviously a best practice. It helps with financial transparency, and it provides assurance to debt rating agencies as well. And I think, as you all know, we produce really two main financial documents each year, and one's the budget document, and one is this year-end financial audit that we go through. And the budget document is important in many ways, but when it comes to debt rating agencies, the state treasurer, banks, investors, when they start looking at the city of Asheville and evaluating our financial health, it's really this year-end financial report that they go to first. And they look at that, and that's really the most important document from their perspective, because it does provide assurance about not only our financial health, but also our internal controls as well. And then finally, I just want to emphasize the importance of this independent review. And one of the things we do here at the City of Asheville to maintain that independence between us and our external auditors is that we rotate audit firms every 5 years. And as I mentioned, this is the first year that we've been with Cherry Beckert. And we've seen through this audit some of the importance of that, of rotating firms, having an independent review. As I said, they identified some things that our previous auditors had not identified in the last few years. So it's been very helpful to have a new set of eyes looking at our financial books as well. So just quickly, and again, Dan's going to talk a lot more about this. So the results from this year, so there's 4 types of opinions that auditors can issue. And like I said on the first slide, we received, once again, what's called the unmodified or clean audit. It's the highest level of assurance. I would draw you all's attention to one of the items we sent out last week as a part of the materials for today, and that's something called the representation letter. And it's a kind of a 7-page summary of some of the key components of the audit. I think there's 55 or so items that it walks through, and it kind of provides an overview of many of the areas that the Cherry Beckert team looked at this year. And it provides assurance to the board and to these committees that they found no fraud, no illegal acts or violations of laws or regulations. And so, again, it's if you have a chance to review that 7-page letter, it really gives you a good understanding of the multitude of things that our auditors looked at this year. And then finally, if you have a lot of time on your hands and you want to look through our fiscal year 2022-2023 annual comprehensive financial report, or ACFR, that's the acronym we use. It provides a complete overview of our financial position as of June 30th of last year. It's also included in the documents that we sent out to you all. It's a 200-page plus document, so it's a thick document, but if you have a chance to review it's a great read as well. So the last thing I want to cover, I think today, before I turn it over to Dan, is our unassigned fund balance. And as I mentioned in the first slide, we ended fiscal year 2023 at 18.8, or just under 19% for our unassigned fund balance in the general fund. And this chart gives you a history looking back for the last 10 years at where our fund balance has ended each of our previous 10 fiscal years. And as you can see, we've done a really good job of managing our fund balance and keeping it between the 15 to 20% level. And again, that dotted blue line there is our policy, our 15% policy that we have. You can see last fiscal year we ended higher than we had in many years, up at 24%. And as we went through the budget process with you all last spring, we appropriated some of that fund balance, about $8 million, to use in the current year budget. And that's the primary reason you see the fund balance dropping from 24% back down closer to 19, where we stand now. So just want to point that out again. It's fund balance level that was less than it was a year ago, but it's still above 19%. And so it will likely provide some level of flexibility for us as we go into the upcoming budget process. If we want to look at utilizing fund balance to fund some one-time items in the budget. So I'll stop there. I see a couple hands have been raised. I think Councilmember Ullman, I think I saw yours first.
Thanks, Tony. In general, I'm hearing a lot of good news, which is the perfect way to have this type of meeting. So thanks for everyone's diligence and getting us to a point where we have such a good audit, and thanks to everyone for doing the detailed work on auditing us. I guess the question I have is, I love seeing this slide. It shows that we're really healthy, that we're doing really strong financial management, and we're keeping a good savings account, which is how I think of fund balance. I'm curious, like, if just from your memory, like, have we dipped substantially below 15% in kind of recent history? Like, I think back to the fallout of 2008 and the housing crisis when our budget got hit several years later. I'm just kind of curious. This is a really awesome 10-year trend, and kind of just wondering about, have we really had to dip into savings in recent memory and what that kind of dip looked like?
Yeah, so great question. So I've been here a while, so I do have a little bit of a memory about where we've been. The only time we've really dipped well below 15% was about 20 years ago, and it was at a time when there was a recession going on. The state was withholding some revenues from local governments, and a lot of local governments at that point saw their fund balance dip down. And when that happened, we purposely took steps to budget more conservatively to get it back up above the 15% threshold. And we were actually lucky that we did that, because we were up above that threshold, actually well above that threshold, when the 2008 crisis hit. And so we did have to dip into fund balance at that point, but we never dipped below the 15% policy target during that time. So yeah, I would say that we've been very successful in managing the fund balance in this narrow band between 15 and 20%. And I think if for a council member, if you're looking at this graph, I think where you would be concerned, again, if you see it dipping down and consistently staying down, or dipping well above or rising well above the 15%, which is an indication that we're being too conservative on our revenue estimates, and that we need to be utilizing our fund balance more and our spending power more. So
yeah, and I'll just follow up on, I think when we were having budget conversations last spring, we did talk about this, and we did dip into this a bit more. We know that fund balance are one-time costs; they're not operational, but I do continue to feel like grateful for our financial conservatism, where we're saving for rainy days, but feeling the pressure and urgency of the challenges our community faces. So we'll continue to, as we look at budget next year, be curious to see if there's ways that we can be maybe closer to 15%. But we'll see. We'll see what comes up. We have a long budget cycle just to get going. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Roney was next.
Thank you. I was waiting for the question period, but since we're asking questions on this slide, I think it would be helpful. We've been talking about this at the Policy and Finance Committee in general, but my concerns around wage and compensation remain. And I think that this kind of graph would be helpful in informing trends, so we could look at projections once again, at least 3, if not 5 years out. I know we've done that in the past. When as a member of the public, I was sitting in similar meetings to this one before we called it the Policy, Finance, and Human Relations, or HR Committee. So in addition to understanding that we typically use this fund for one time, not for operations, I am concerned that we might need to shift our thinking about that if we're only using it for one-time funds and not meeting living wages. I think of for our first responders, for public works. So it would really help me if a follow-up to this meeting, we could talk about what our projection is for fund balance for this year moving forward. Projections.
Jim, can you explain how what you're thinking about the correlation between the fund balance and employee pay? I'm trying to understand what you're
Sure. So I think
maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe you're just saying you want a projection of the fund balance estimate.
It definitely matters. So I think when I was sitting in these meetings as a member of the public before I was on council, there were presentations about wage and compensation and how when we looked 3 to 5 years out, we weren't going to have enough resources to keep on track with paying our people. And it was because we were looking beyond just one budget cycle. And so if we find that our general fund balance keeps being higher than our policy target, then I'm wondering if we need to shift some of the conversation, and we won't know if we're only looking 1 year at a time instead of looking 3 to 5 years out at what we can project.
Okay, all right. I see what you're saying. You're saying maybe we're being too conservative with our fund balance estimate, and we could be using that money to pay people more.
Yes, and I think that will only happen if we do what we've already done in the past. And I'm hopefully not asking for anything new, because I know this organization is familiar with projections.
Thank you for that question.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to only focus. I mean, I think we've got to pay employees more, and I want to be as aggressive as we possibly can about paying employees more. I don't know. I think fund balance levels are one factor in that. Probably a bigger factor is our revenue growth through property taxes and sales tax revenue. But I think that the projection, as long as, that makes sense to me. I don't know what's involved in terms of, because you've mentioned this before, and I think we've struggled to get that information, and I assume it's just burdensome or difficult, or is it an impossible task? I don't really know. Tony, maybe you can say how difficult it is.
Or it's not a priority that we've made. So
yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's that, or if it's like, sometimes I've found over the years that when we don't get information back from staff that's been requested, it's because really no one knows how to get it. So I wasn't sure if there's a challenge with just trying to figure out how to extrapolate that information, or if it's just a matter of time.
Sure. I was going to say, I just quickly, I appreciate the comments and the questions, and yeah, I think we will definitely be coming back to you all. And I think it's at the January meeting. I think it's on your work plan to begin talking about next year's budget and what some of our compensation strategies that we're looking at for next year. I will say, I'll just add quickly. So one of the main drivers of the fund balance the last couple of years, and why it has been up above the 15% target, has been our sales tax growth, which has been unprecedented for the last few years. And we're really beginning to see that tail off back to a more normal level. And so that's going to have an impact moving forward as well on our ability to fund new items in the upcoming budget process. But way more to come on that in the next few months. So Councilmember Turner, I see you have a question.
Well, yeah, and it might help with the others' questions, because what would help me is, if I know it's difficult to find the fund balance and dollar amount at any given moment in time. There's just too much in and out, too frequent. But since you have created a graph with specific data points, could we add the dollar value of that percentage to this graph? That might help. I think sometimes we're talking about 8 million or 2 million. We don't really know, because the budget changes all those years as well. At least it would give us, some range. And then another helpful piece might be explaining the relevance of the sales tax to that. To your point, I see how dependent we are on that sales tax additional revenue for our kind of fluffy budgeting at the end. But, it's trending downward, isn't it? So we really need to be careful. I think, I just think the dollar amounts would help alongside the percentage if possible.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you all for that feedback. And like I said, a lot more to come on the upcoming budget in the next few months. So I'm going to move on to the next slide unless there's any other questions, because I think at this point, it's where I stop sharing and I turn it over to the team at Cherry Becker.
All right. Thank you, Tony. Richard Hart, who's with me, is going to be bringing up the presentation, and I'll be starting this off. But as he gets that up, I just want to thank the committee for allowing us to be here and to go over the financial results. I mean, as Tony had mentioned, this is a 4 or 5 month process that culminates with an opinion that we are giving on the financial statements. And so it's a lot of hard work from everyone involved to get to this place. And so I just want to, first off, just appreciate Tony and his team and Becky for all of their hard work in getting us to this point and getting this issue. So I just want to, off the bat, just thank them for their timeliness of getting us information. You get into a first year audit, you don't always know what you're going to get first year. And I was astounded by just the responsiveness from them and the urgency in terms of getting us things timely. So I just want to appreciate their hard work. So going on to our agenda here, we're just going to talk about overall just the high-level results of our audit. And then we also have some required communications that we need to talk with you about. In the past, this has been done in a letter format. We as a firm had done this in a letter format. I think your previous auditors had done this. As a firm, this last 2 years, we decided that the presentation was a little bit better to do than a letter, because with a letter, you don't know who's actually reading the letter and getting the information from it. So we've just incorporated all our required communications into this presentation. We'll try to really talk at a high level about some of these things and not get into the minutia and details on it all. But please ask any questions you have. More than willing to answer questions throughout the presentation or at the end, whichever is your preference. So just going into a client service team, I always like to also just recognize our team internally. Myself as the engagement director, Scott Anderson is a second partner reviewer, and then we had Richard Hart, who's on this call as well. You'll be hearing from him a little bit later. He was the senior manager on this job. And then we have Bruce Phillips and Rachel Combs, who was the senior and associate working on the engagement. So first off, we perform our audit in accordance with generally accepted auditing standards. We also perform our audit in accordance with government auditing standards, both of which we are required to do certain testing to provide reasonable assurance that the financial statements are free from material misstatement. We had issued our reports with the date of November 1st, 2023. And we also performed our audit over compliance as it relates to the federal and state monies that you receive that were required to be audited. And this year in particular, we had audited the federal program, Coronavirus State Local Fiscal Recovery Funds, which is also known as the ARPA funds that you have. And then we also audited 2 state programs, one being the Street Maintenance Assistance Program and the other being PAL Bill Street Aid. The next slide here, the results of our audit, we issued, as Tony had mentioned, an unmodified opinion, also known as a clean opinion, the highest level opinion we can give under our auditing standards, which basically means the financial statements there's reasonable assurance the financial statements are free of material misstatement and are appropriately presented in accordance with Government Accounting Standards Board requirements and generally accepted accounting principles. This next slide here, I'm going to turn it over to Richard to go over the next about 10 slides, which is a lot of our required communications.
Thank you, Dan. So just some of the required communications. Whenever you see the financial statements, we always tell everyone, the readers, to look at note 1. That's where a lot of the information about the accounting policies for the city are. So, please take time to look at note 1. The major adjustment this year was the implementation of GASB Standard 96, which is related to subscription-based information technology agreements. And so you will see in the financials this year, compared to previous years, there are additional assets and liabilities related to these subscription-based agreements. As a part of our communication and our review of financials and the city, we also have to make sure that we communicate to you all if we're aware of any of the following, which as of right now, we're communicating. We have noted none of the following. We've noted no related party transactions that were undisclosed to us, no significant related party transactions that didn't have a business purpose, no non-compliance of laws or regulations that we identified, and no difficulties identifying who controls the city. Additionally, we noted no significant or unusual transactions. That would mean any transactions that the city may take that's outside the normal course of the business of the city. So none of those were identified. And as a part of our review, we also look at accounting estimates that we consider significant. And those would be estimates that have items in there that need to be estimated by management. A lot of the key estimates are related to unbilled revenue for water, your allowance for uncollectible accounts related to receivables, depreciable lives, and estimated residual value for your capital assets, the right of use assets, subscription assets, and lease receivables and deferred inflows. And just to reiterate, right of use assets was related to the implementation of GASB 87 last year. Subscription assets are new this year, related to the implementation of GASB Standard 96. The additional ones, defined benefit plans related to your Elders, LEOSA, your OPEB, other post-employment benefit plan liabilities with the deferred inflows and outflows that relate to that as well, and any incurred but not reported claims payable. So that would be any lag related to what's expected to be incurred for claims, but have not been reported to the city at the time of the financials. These estimates that we reviewed, and we looked at key factors and assumptions by management, we didn't notice any bias from management, and everything was based off of historical information and actual data available. Additionally, as we look at the financial statements and the footnotes that coincide with them, we just make sure that the financial statement disclosures are neutral and consistent and clear, and they were. Additionally, as Tony mentioned, it's very important that we stay independent and that you have independent auditors. So we make sure multiple times throughout the audit that we stay and maintain our independence. Our firm's advisory, as part of our firm's assistance with the city, we do perform some non-attest services. Our firm's advisory team assisted the city with preparing the financial statements, and that was in assistance with Tony and Becky. We also helped prepare the data collection form, which is submitted because due to the single audit, the federal and state grant audits. And so we do perform that and assist with that. From review of our non-attest services, we did see and maintain our independence. And so we're communicating that to you today. And then here we get to a couple of the fun slides. A lot of colors and words, but we'll go over it quickly. Some of the other required communications we had, we did not encounter any significant difficulties with management. We had no noted disagreements with management, and they were very helpful during first year audit. As Dan mentioned before, first year audits are very rigorous, and so they were very helpful with that. Auditor consultations, we communicate to you if we have any consultations outside of our audit team. The only consultation we had this year was related to our beginning balance review from the predecessor auditor, and that's just normal and required for our firm. So nothing outside the normal course. Management representations, as Tony mentioned, we had that representation letter that he provided you all that you could review. Management signed that and dated that November 1st to coincide with our financial statement and opinions. As far as we're aware, management didn't have any consultations outside to second accounting firms, and they weren't identifying any additional discussions with the other accounting firms. We had no other findings or issues other than what we disclosed here today with you all. As of this date, we are not aware and have not been made aware of any fraud, illegal acts, or violations of laws or regulations. And to our identification, we've not seen any events or conditions that would indicate there's a going concern with the city, which I think Tony's presentation and discussion about fund balance assists with that. A couple of other matters. There are additional information within the financial statements. Again, Tony mentioned the aquifer is 215 pages, so there's additional information besides financial statements and basic footnotes. Some of that's called required supplementary information that includes management discussion and analysis and some additional items as noted in table of contents. Again, that is not a part of our audit opinion, and so we don't opine on it. but we do review it and cooperate it with management's information and the additional information that's presented based off of the financial statements and footnotes. We make sure it all is consistent. Additionally, there's supplementary information. It relates to the grants that we tested. There is a schedule of expenditures of federal and state awards that goes along with that. We make sure and look at the supplementary information related to that, the individual fund financial statements. And again, we don't opine on this, but we do ensure that it reconciles to the information that we have audited, and we cooperate any information that we need, that we deem necessary with the financial records. Lastly, there is other information. There is an introductory section and a statistical section. We did not subject any of that to our auditing procedures, and therefore we don't express an opinion on it, and so we just inform you of that. Now I'll hand it back over to Dan to continue.
Okay. The next slide I'm going to go over here is internal control communications. So overall, we give opinions on the financial statements. We give opinions on the compliance with federal and state grants, but we do not provide an opinion on controls. If we become aware of anything, we report anything to you that would be in this form of a finding, but we do not express an opinion on the effectiveness of your control structure. And there could be material weaknesses or significant deficiencies not identified that do exist or went undetected as part of our audit. If you go into the next slide here, we're going to go over what the definition is of a material weakness and a significant deficiency. So the two findings we give most commonly in a control finding is either a material weakness, and that being a material weakness being a deficiency or a combination of deficiencies, that there's a reasonable possibility that a material misstatement exists and would not be prevented or detected and corrected on a timely basis. So this could be something where we identify an amount that is either a dollar value, a quantitative amount that's material to the financial statements based on our materiality numbers, or it could be something that's qualitative in nature, such as if you have a debt covenant and the adjustment could affect that debt covenant, then that could be something material, even though the dollar value might be small. It also does not include, it also includes those that are below our materiality threshold, but have a potential to be above our materiality threshold if a control is not in place. And then a significant deficiency just being one less of a material weakness, but still important enough for us to identify and communicate to you all. And so on the next slide here, we've identified the following material weaknesses and significant deficiencies, as Tony alluded to in his part of the presentation. The first one here relates to the recognition of revenue for amounts previously had been reported as a liability as unearned revenue. So this basically is the coronavirus state and local fiscal recovery funds. There were certain accruals that came in after year end. Those accruals were properly expensed and also accrued for in the payable account, but the revenue related to those accruals that should have been recognized was not recognized. And so this was something in the later part of the financial reporting process that went missed, and we had found as part of some of our procedures in confirming some of the amounts. One thing I want to mention here is this is one transaction that was missed. This isn't a consideration of multiple transactions. This is just one transaction, and it really just has to do with the year-end process. And the other thing here too is that from an unearned revenue standpoint, you as a city do not receive normally grants in advance. Normally your grants are based on reimbursement basis. And so on reimbursement basis, you don't recognize the revenue until you've incurred the cost. And then you don't actually even get to request the funds until you've incurred the cost. Here, you've gotten this money up in advance. And so again, it's just accounting technical correction. We have a hand up.
Daniel, I think you might have answered my question. This is Councilmember Roney. I guess my curiosity is, have you seen something similar happen in other municipalities, and or is there a best practice to address that material weakness?
Sure. And so I have seen this at other ones. I would say maybe 2 or 3 out of the 10 that I do have this kind of finding going on, especially with the coronavirus funding coming out and the CARES Act funding coming in, and where governments in the past have not received this in advance, their government funding, but it's something where it can just be done by just kind of that year-end process. So just adding to, I think the city has a checklist in place in terms of what they look at, and they just need to add it in to make sure they're looking at it after the accruals for accounts payable are been completed to make sure there's no additional revenue that needs to be recognized. And so that is what we've recommended as part of our comment, is that the city add that into their process.
Thank you.
And then for the significant deficiency here, we had last year was the year of the implementation of the lease standard, in which the city had put on their books a lease receivable and a deferred inflow, which is just a balance sheet effect only. It has no effect on your fund balance, has no effect on your net position. It basically is just an entry to book a gross up of your balance sheet, a receivable for an amount that's owed over the term of the lease, and then a deferred inflow for the revenue that will be recognized over the term of the lease, sort of like an unearned revenue you can think of it as well. And so this one should never have been recorded on the balance sheet because it related to naming rights of the Civic Center. And so because the naming rights were not in the scope of the leases, since it's an intangible asset, those should just be recorded as they're received payment-wise. Again, one transaction we're dealing with here. We're not dealing with, we had no other issues with any other leases or subscription-based information technologies that the city implemented this year. But it was a large dollar value amount, and it had no effect on your fund balance. So what you saw last year in terms of fund balance is still accurate. It was still the same number, even with this correction.
Dan, I'll just add on quickly related to that one too. And this kind of goes back to the comment I made at the beginning of the presentation about the importance of new eyes looking at things, because I think, as Dan or Richard may have mentioned, we implemented what's called GASB 87, that standard, last fiscal year, which meant Becky and her team worked with our previous set of auditors to take a look at all of our leases citywide, leases where we receive money and also leases where we pay money, and record those on our books. And this one we had recorded last year, the Harrah's naming rights agreement on our books and included it as a lease. And our auditors last year reviewed it and said, yes, we think that's the proper classification. Dan and his team, looking at it this year, said, no, we think it needs to be interpreted a different way. And we totally agree with their interpretation. But again, just kind of a great example of how important it is to have new, fresh eyes looking at your books every year. So, Debbie, I see you have a question.
Yes, Tony, can I assume that related to that grant revenue, that the checklist, year-end checklist has been updated?
Yes, we've done that. There's actually, I don't know if you all had a chance to look yet, but there's a section in the Act for where we talk about staff's corrective action and corrective plan that we have for each of these findings that Dan and Richard are talking about today. So, and we'll talk to you all more. One of our things that we do is when we meet with the audit committee again in January, we'll look back to where we are today and update you all on where we're at with implementing the changes that we're making to make sure that we don't have these types of misstatements occur next year. So,
thank you.
Yes, Sarah, I see you have a question, or Sandra, I'm sorry.
Yeah, what I just want to be clear on is, even with the reclassification of the list receivable, is this still something owed to the city?
Yes, so the amount is owed to the city over the term of the lease of the agreement. So over time, you will receive payments each year. I can't remember exactly, maybe $500,000 a year or so that you will receive over the term of the agreement. There's nothing changed in terms of how you will receive the payment.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Dan, for letting me jump in.
Okay. Yep, no problem. So the next slide we have here is we are required to communicate to you any corrected or uncorrected adjustments as it relates to the financial statements. And so the only two adjustments we had were the ones we just went over on the last slide. So I won't go through that, but those were the only two that we had found as part of our audit. And on this slide here, we have uncorrected adjustments. So at times we will find things in our audit, a lot of times later in the process of the audit where we're kind of getting to the finish line, and instead of correcting it this year, we propose the adjustment and management will pass on the adjustment and do the adjustment in a future year. And so this one was one related to the street cut utility fund. And this has to do with the billings of revenue in fiscal year, amounts that were billed after fiscal year end that related to fiscal year 2023 were not presented. So you're always kind of a month off in terms of your billings to revenue, which affects the ending fund balance there for the street cut utility fund, or net position for the street cut utility fund. Nothing is wrong in terms of you guys are billing for the amounts. It's just that those billings are happening kind of later in the process after financial reporting has been completed. Next slide here is just a few new accounting pronouncements that are going to come down the pike here. 99 and 100 being ones that are due next year. 99 is one where it's kind of a catch-all. GASB does this every once in a while where, they want to fix a number of things throughout the different standards. They do it in one standard. Nothing in there that speaks to me that will affect the city. In GASB 100, it just better defines what an accounting change or error correction is and when you have to restate when you have one or when you do it on a prospective basis going forward. Nothing big changing there. It's just more of terminology change. And then the other one is 101 compensated absences, which is not effective till 2025. But this is creating a different rules-based kind of approach to what constitutes a compensated absence, such as vacation and sick leave accrual. There's been some discussion about that in terms of what if some sick leave would need to be accrued as well. But it's really more of a policy matter. And so we'll be talking with the city as the years go by and trying to work out what the city's intent is as it regards to that, so that we're accruing the right amount once this standard is implemented. Next few slides here are LGC performance indicators. I'm not sure, but your former auditors might have presented this to you in the past. These are performance indicators that the local government commission at the state level has deemed to be important indicators that they want us to make those in charge of governance aware of through our presentations. So these numbers come based on their calculations and based on their definitions. And so you'll see here fund balance available. We just did a whole thing. Tony had done a whole thing about the 18.8% of your fund balance being available. And now you see here in 2023 is 63.81%. The difference between those two schedules is that the local government commission includes your debt service fund in this calculation. And it also includes some restricted and committed fund balances that are not available to be spent on general expenditures. But based on the state's definition, they have included it here. So I do want to make sure there's no confusion between what Tony has shown. You all will follow the city's policy in terms of the 15% and what you actually have in unassigned fund balance. But this is just something the government commission looks at and wants all governments to have above 25%. Well, in terms of the size of your city, they want it to be above 25%, which you are well above that threshold. But again, includes a lot of amounts that can't be spent otherwise because they're related to debt or related to other restrictions. This quick ratio is just a current assets to current liabilities ratio. They want you to be greater than 1. Here, you're greater than 6. Not a whole lot to glean from this, though. I would say you're consistent with your other peers across the city with having amounts well above 1. And really what that means, too, is, you charge water and all to also to gain revenues to then fix the system over time and continue to expand and continue to make repairs and maintenance. And so that just means that you have a little bit more built up. to spend on that maintenance and repairs and all, but there's not uncommon from other cities and counties. Yes.
Can I just restate this to make sure I'm understanding what the metric is? Essentially, this is, we're a city, we need to charge money to run our systems, but we're not here for profit. So in a business, you might be looking at a profit margin. But for us, we're looking at this ratio to understand if we're charging like egregious rates and not reinvesting. So that's kind of the signal of if we have a healthy ratio, it's that as we're making excess resources, we're then directing it back into the service.
Correct. I would say that's accurate.
And then the change in what we're seeing is we've been growing our savings so that we can do some major investments in the future.
I would say that's accurate. I don't know if Tony, do you want to add anything to that or?
No, I think that's accurate as well.
Cool. All right. Thank you. Appreciate it.
And then the next slide we have here is just, again, some other metrics that they have in terms of wanting to see that your water sewer is greater than 0. It's not very high threshold that they give you there to meet, but that's in line with other cities that we see. And then you also have your percentage of fund balance or cash to expenses, which needs to be greater than 16%. And then the new one that they have in here is your water sewer capital asset condition ratio. And so basically what they're doing there is using your gross assets and your accumulated depreciation on those assets, coming up with a factor of how long lived your assets are. And anything is considered below a 0.50 is considered, not just because you're a little below the 0.50 doesn't mean anything concerned, but it does mean that your aging is going up on some of your assets. And there might be some repairs or maintenance or additional resources needed to improve those assets. And so you're at 0.55, which is above the 0.50. And this is a new factor that has been added in this past year. So management has just kind of seen this from the LGC same time as you all right now. But I've done 3 or 4 of these already, and I've seen everyone from 0.50 to 0.55 is the norm, is what I've been seeing right now. Yes. Question?
Me again. If we go back to that last slide, I'm just trying to process on
Sure.
the fact that we had a water outage recently, the fact that we're talking about water rates and who bears the burden of those, our residential, our commercial, our industrial, et cetera. I'm kind of curious, is there, so you're showing us this ratio and that, right now we're at, 6.72. When, is there any guidance on where a flag of concern would be? So if we had a magic wand and we could really give the water system all the investment it needs, now that's not easy because it would come from ratepayers. I'm just kind of curious to understand, if we really felt like we needed to double down and pull in all the resources needed to give the water system what it needs, is there a point in this type of ratio where y'all would say, whoa, 15% is egregious and unacceptable? Or is what LGC looking for is just, I guess they're saying greater to or equal 1, so 1 is their ideal. Could you just share a little bit about how this factor could kind of influence those type of thoughts?
Yeah, so I guess the LGC is basically saying here that your current assets should match your current liability. So basically saying you should have in cash or receivable shortly thereafter to pay current liabilities 1-to-1. So that's where they're distinguishing there, that there are some smaller towns out there in North Carolina that have a problem with that. They have assets that are far below their current liabilities. And so they have cash management issues. And so this was really made to focus on those entities where you and other cities of your size don't really have that factor. And in terms of the height going over or not, that's really a personal kind of decision process internally at each city based on the projects you have up and coming and what you're going to use that money for.
Okay. Thank you.
And I would also add into, I think where you see this ratio come into play most is when the debt rating agencies review our water system, and what they want to see is a healthy quick ratio. They want to see a ratio that, like Dan mentioned, that's comparable to our peers. And that's really, I think, the key point when for those debt rating agencies, when they look at this and then they assign a debt rating to our water debt that we issue, and obviously having a better debt rating means lower cost of issuance and lower rates on our ratepayers and all that stuff. So that's really where I see, where I see this ratio being utilized and coming up the most. So hopefully that was helpful.
Totally. So this ratio doesn't really play in as like a throttle to investment ambition. It just doesn't show up that way. It shows up more for validating that like we're managing our assets and our revenues well.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that.
And go one more slide there. Yes. So the last slide I have here today is basically just a summary of all the LGC performance indicators in which you had no financial performance indicators of concern as it relates to the ratios or dollar value thresholds that the LGC has given. You had no issues with your budgeted tax levy. So this would be if you budgeted more than you actually received by 3%, then that would be an issue. You did not have that. You had a positive general fund balance. You have submitted within 5 months of your fiscal year end. You have an effective pre-audit process to avoid any pervasive or any major budget violations. You had no budget violations. You had no late debt service payments. You had no debt covenant compliance issues. You had no statutory violations with general statutes, including 159. And then the only thing to take out of this is because we have the two financial statement findings, the city is required as of the date of our presentation to council, 60 days from that presentation to council to complete a corrective action plan, which has already been done as part of the financial statement process, but signed by council members, by a majority of the council members, and then sent to the local government commission saying, this is how it's going to be handled or has been handled. And we, we're aware of it. So with that, I will open it up for any other questions, and I can go back to any slide if there's anything in particular you want to talk about. Yes.
Yep. So on the topic of related party transactions, I'm a former auditor, so excuse the question, but
sure.
I work in the financial services space. So I know what typical related party transactions are in that space. When it comes to governmental entities, other than transactions between, funds, what are typical related party transactions that you guys are concerning yourselves with?
Sure. So that's typically going to be those with the charge of management or council. And because in terms of a government, a lot of times council members have outside business interests that they work on, and making sure that you guys have a policy in place for conflict of interest, which you do, to ensure that you're recusing yourself from any votes that could possibly be a related party issue. And then if you do have a related party transaction, from an audit standpoint, we would look into that and make sure everything was being done appropriately with that transaction as noted, and then make sure that's noted in the financial statements.
Okay, that makes sense. One other question for you. So you guys your firm had performed a risk assessment for the city. I believe that was in I'm trying to think, maybe the spring of 2023.
Yep.
And there were a variety of findings from that risk assessment procedure. I'm curious whether or not, based on those risks, you guys had to perform any additional procedures as part of this audit, just in light of kind of where we stand with the internal audit department at the city.
Yeah, so I mean, with that risk assessment process, I just want to make clear too here, just because we're bringing this up, from an independent standpoint, we did also make sure, because we knew we were going to be proposing on this on the audit side, that we did not cross any lines with that risk assessment process, and made sure we were not in control of it, and it was management's assessment of the risks with our help in terms of seeing industry standards and what's out there. The risk assessment is generally at a more detailed level than an audit. So from the risk assessment, we did not see anything in there that raised our concern, that changed an approach in terms of how we handled the audit per se.
Yep.
But we do look at that and see what's going on there. And then from an internal audit to external audit standpoint, as you're probably aware, just there's a different scope. So there's different things that we won't look at that internal audit would probably look at. So there's just a different scope there of what we'd be assessing. But there are sometimes some overlap, but we did not see any from looking at the risk assessment.
All right, and one more follow-up question on that point. So just to make sure, you guys did not perform any additional procedures due to the fact that our internal audit position is currently vacant. Is that right to say?
Correct. I mean, I will say that there's a lot of cities and counties out there that don't have an internal audit position out there. And while, I mean, it changes our, approach in looking at things, but it did not change generally what we did. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Any more questions for Dan? And if you want to think about it a few minutes, I'm actually going to, Richard, if you want to stop presenting, I'm going to show my screen here to finish things off this morning. So just quickly, so next steps. So again, just want to point out that all the materials from today's presentation, the slides, the representation letter, the ACFR, all of that's available on the city's website. The team from Cherry Becker, Dan and Richard will be here in person on December 12th to present to the full city council. And then, as Dan mentioned, those financial performance indicators of concern, the corrective action plans, staff is already working on those, and we'll report back to the audit committee at its January meeting about the status of those plans. So, Councilmember Roney, I see you have a question.
Yeah, I guess I just have a general question. And after reading through all the attached documents, thank you very much for making those available to us. I noticed that overtime wasn't brought up once. And I'm curious, as cities across the country are dealing with staffing shortages and the need to be more flexible with workers around the time that they're available. It's curious to me if there's not currently some triggers where overtime is something that we look at, what would cause it to be a concern? Is it over a period of time? Are other cities like ours seeing similar things, and that's why it doesn't come up as an issue now? Maybe that's not an answer for today, but it is something I'm curious about for future audits as we consider what it means to have quality, equitable services with limited staff.
Dan, Richard, I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add.
I mean, the only thing I could say is I do see across all cities that there are shortages and overtime being used. We did not do any particular detailed analysis on that as part of our audit, but I will say, I mean, especially when you talk about EMS agencies and the frontline workers in general, you do see some shortages there and overtime with that. And everyone's just trying to manage as best they can right now with different approaches, whether it be retention bonuses or whatnot that they're doing. But it's kind of a multitude out there in terms of what people are trying to do to combat that.
Thank you. I appreciate that answer, and I look forward to future conversations.
All right. And then once again, our key takeaway slide that we end with, I won't go through these again. I think that is our last slide today, and I will take my presentation down. But I'm happy to answer any more questions, or if y'all have any questions for Dan or Richard as well. So I see Ms. Campbell has raised her hand.
Tony, could you talk about kind of the next steps? I think you alluded to the next meeting with the audit committee will be in January, and then we have a December policy HR committee meeting. So is that correct?
No, this won't come back. This will not come back to the Policy, Finance, and HR Committee. It will go to the full council. So it's the regular 5 p.m. council meeting on December 12th, I believe is the date. Full council will hear a version of this presentation, maybe not as in-depth. We typically don't do as in-depth a presentation with the full council as we do with these two committees, partly because we do have some overlap and a number of council folks will have already heard it as well. But we will definitely be here. Richard and Dan will be here, or at least one of them will be here to present to you all in December. And then, like I said, we'll be reporting back to the audit committee in January. And then all this is going to start over again real soon. I think Richard and Dan were talking to us last week. I think we're talking March-ish starting up again. So we're going to be kicking back into maybe not high gear, but kicking things off again real soon with this team. And I'll just say we've really enjoyed working with Dan and Richard this year. It's been a great first year experience, and we really look forward to continuing the relationship over the next few years.
Yeah, Tony, I know that it wouldn't be a formal agenda item, but if the committee members had any additional questions,
sure,
get us prepared for January.
Sure. Absolutely.
And then lastly, I want to thank our auditors, but I also want to thank our staff. This is a heavy lift. And as has been noted, transitioning from one accounting firm to another firm, or auditing firm, sometimes it isn't easy, but I think it speaks highly of Tony's leadership as well as Becky, who actually did most of the heavy lifting. I'm sorry, Tony, I got to give credit where credit's due. To get this work done. And yes, there were some technical things that were kind of zingers and surprises for us. But all in all, it was a clean audit. I just don't want anybody to forget that, but also just acknowledging the tremendous amount of work that goes into this process. And I will close. I think Sandra, you had a comment or question? You're on mute.
Just to follow up on what you're saying, yes, it is a tremendous amount of work when you have to do audits of this magnitude and printing the report, 215 to be exact. That's even more than corporations, the annual reports. So I can appreciate that. What I'm just going to say is, when we look at the material misstatements and the 3 items listed, I'm just wondering, and please, don't take it personally, but you have the budget. So I'm just stating in general that sometimes maybe it's helpful to, to watch the budget, more closely so that you can pick up the variance, the variances in the items, because if you have your budget and you have the actual figures and you're comparing those two, there should be some trigger right there that, hey, this is not aligning. We have a major variance here to help with the errors along the way. So that's just basically what I just want to comment on. But overall, thank you for your work, and I appreciate your efforts.
Thank you.
I'll just say a quick congratulations, y'all, on the clean audit. I know that's a big deal. And I'm sorry that you have to turn around and start to do it all over again, but that's just how it goes. You've set a new bar, so we'll look for the next clean audit. Really great work, everybody.
Thank you. All right, and I guess with that, I'll turn it back over to the mayor.
Thanks. And thank you all for a great round of presentations and the thorough work. Very, very professional. So thank you very much. Okay, so the only other item on our agenda is for public comment. I'm going to ask staff if anyone's in the queue for public.
No, Mayor, there's no public comment.
Okay. All right, so with that, I think unless there's any other matters, we will adjourn. All right, thanks for our inaugural joint meeting. That was great. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.